So my case study, my paper is a case study, and it is about research I've conducted back in 2017 in Scotland. But I thought it might be interesting for this seminar series as well, because the results of this research have been influenced to a great extent by sources beyond the periodical text, and also because this research has a transnational perspective as well, for it concerns Hungarian women's engagement with transnational journalistic practices during the second half of the 19th century. So I will start now. On the 4th of October 1881, Fővárosi Lapok, which is Metropolitan Magazine, reported enthusiastically on one of the Hungarian Stephanie Wohl's articles published in the Scotsman. I quote, "Foreign news. The prestigious Scottish newspaper, the Scotsman, has just published 2 long articles about the Hungarian exhibition of the ladies' domestic industry and art needlework. The articles are written by Stephanie Wohl, a well-known writer, who for some time has also been a foreign correspondent for the Scottish Daily." Stephanie Wohl's engagement in transnational journalistic practices and print cultures was again highlighted in the obituaries occasioned by her premature death at the age of 43 in 1889. According to Vasárnapi Újság, the Sunday magazine, Maker, could you please move to the next slide? Stephanie Wohl and her sister Janka were among the most highly educated Hungarian women. Stephanie had a good command of several European languages, allowing her to express herself clearly through writing in an appropriate style. She also worked for foreign magazines and newspapers such as the Scotsman, based in Edinburgh, and the French Revue Internationale, as well as diverse German literary periodicals. These pieces of information regarding the Wohl sisters' language skills and foreign connections then migrated into entries and chapters of Hungarian literary histories written about their life and works. Although autobiographical sources, mainly correspondents, occasionally also suggested Stephanie Wohl's contribution to foreign periodicals, until recently there was no reliable knowledge regarding her Scottish contacts. Thus, in 2017, with the support of the Hungarian Eötvös Scholarship hosted by the University of Glasgow, I conducted a 4-month research in Glasgow and Edinburgh with the primary aim to explore an under-researched topic, that of 19th century Hungarian women writers' engagement with transnational journalistic practices. But in order to achieve my goals, my primordial task was to find Wohl's articles published in the Scotsman. At the time of my arrival to Glasgow, with no specific information about these writings, I had a number of questions to be answered. Could we go to the next slide, please? So my questions were, how many articles did Stephanie Wohl publish in the Scotsman? What was the time frame of these publications, or when did these articles come out? The topic of Wohl's writings, what were these articles about? How did Wohl come in contact with the Scottish newspaper? Did she have Scottish connections? Who were these people? Was she really a regular contributor to the Scotsman? Or maybe she had published an article or two and Hungarian magazines overstated her contribution. A certain snobbery persisted in the Wohl sisters' self-representation in contemporary media, so I had to ask myself this question as well. Catherine Waters has recently provided a thorough analysis of the significance of special correspondence as a new, highly popular form of Victorian journalism, a strictly modern innovation that emerged in the context of developments in the rapid expansion of the periodical and newspaper press in the second half of the 19th century. This paper, however, will not discuss Stephanie Wohl's role as foreign correspondent, nor will it analyze the content of her articles. I've already examined this particular aspect of her contribution to the Scotsman in another essay. This presentation, relying on digital resources and archival research, provides a methodological case study using the example of Stephanie Wohl's contribution to the Scotsman. It focuses on the challenge of establishing her authorship and uncovering her Scottish connections, a process during which sources beyond the periodical text were of crucial importance in determining the outcomes of the research. So I will start with a short introduction about the Wohl sisters, Stephanie and Janka, and I will then move on to introduce the research process during which I have found and collected Stephanie's articles published in the Scottish newspaper. And with the help of archival material, I've been able to identify Wohl as indeed their author. I will also make reference to additional outcomes of this research. Then I will conclude by reiterating the idea that the sources beyond the periodical text are of crucial significance in determining the authorship of unsigned texts. So Stephanie and her older sister Janka Wohl were writers, journalists, editors, and renowned figures in the literary circles and social life of 19th century Budapest. So you can see on the slide, Janka on the left and Stephanie on the right. Of Jewish origin, their family converted to Lutheranism as a result of the Scottish missions activity in Hungary in the 1840s. Thus, the Wohl sisters had maintained permanent contact with British culture from their early childhood. Unfortunately, a lack of sources makes a detailed reconstruction of these Hungarian-British connections impossible. Stephanie published her first book, a volume of flower legends, at the age of 19. Some of these legends, translated by the author, also appeared afterwards in Good Words in 1873. You can see it on the next slide. This publication from the Good Words, yes. Aranyfüst, or the English title is Sem Volt, her novel about the fashionable life of the Hungarian aristocracy, had the greatest impact of all her publications. Considered the writer's magnum opus, the original Hungarian version appeared in 1887, and after its German and French translation, it was also rendered into English and published posthumously by Ward and Downey in London in 1890. Stephanie, together with her sister Janka, also ran a saloon that meant to entertain illustrious guests from the hectic cultural and political world of Budapest. The mutual affection between the sisters was almost proverbial in Hungarian circles of that time. Devoted to each other, they never married, sharing a common dwelling until the premature death of Stephanie in 1889. Indeed, the Wohl sisters fit the typical profile of the self-supporting woman writer of the time, middle-class spinsters who had a passion for writing from a young age, and in addition to being published authors of several books, also produced a significant amount of journalistic work. Of course, many of you have already been familiar with the Wohl sisters from an article published by Zsolt Mészáros in the special issue on women editors in the Journal of European Periodical Studies. Stephanie and Janka both contributed extensively to periodical literature. At the age of 20, Stephanie became the fashion column editor of the magazine Divat, which is fashion, but left it in 1872 to publish and edit, together with her sister, their own magazine, A Nők Munkakora, Women's Work. In 1873, they took over and edited for many years Magyar Bazár, or Hungarian Bazaar, a Hungarian version of the German magazine Der Bazar, published in Berlin. Under the editorship of the Wohl sisters, Magyar Bazár became the longest-lived Hungarian women's paper in the second half of the 19th century. The Wohl sisters, as editors of Hungarian fashion magazines, undoubtedly sustained a continuous collaboration with foreign editorial teams as well. Therefore, at the time of a collaboration with the Scotsman, Stephanie Wohl might have already had considerable journalistic experience. However, at the beginning of my research, I had no reliable information about the time frame of her contribution to the newspaper. She could have published her articles in the Scotsman any time from 1866, the year she started her journalistic career, to 1889, the year of her death. The first challenge was then to find these writings in the Scotsman, a radical paper established in 1817, which began its daily publication in 1855. Thus, as a daily newspaper, it meant a huge amount of material to be revised. As the digital version of the Scotsman is available online through ProQuest British Periodicals, I've commenced my research with keyword search. The initial assumption was that keywords would eventually lead to page results with Stephanie Wohl's name, and the list of articles published in the Scottish newspaper. As expected, the first keyword I typed into the search engine was Stephanie Wohl's name, but the database did not provide the types of results I was hoping for. Search hits results only listed those 3 flower legends signed by Wohl in Good Words in 1873. The tradition of journalistic anonymity, however, as we all well know, was a common feature of the 19th century periodical press. Therefore, if Stephanie Wohl published her articles anonymously in the Scotsman, I needed keywords and keyword hits that would make possible to retrieve from the database the images of either a specific article or a complete page. So I went back to that news item published in the Hungarian Metropolitan magazine, quoted at the beginning of my paper, and based on its content, I developed another set of keyword search terms, which included, can we go to the next slide, please? So you can see here the keywords I used: exhibition, domestic industry, needlework, Budapest. This kind of text mining brought to surface the relevant information and finally provided the results I expected. Indeed, on 16 and 27 September 1881, the Scotsman published 2 linked articles titled Exhibition of the Ladies' Domestic Industry and Art Needlework at Budapest. You can see on the slide the first article I found, published on 16 September 1881, and I marked with red Stephanie Wohl's article. The articles originated from a Hungarian correspondent and reported in detail on a great exhibition organized to display products of domestic industry from southeastern Europe. Having retrieved from the database the first 2 articles, Hungarian correspondent became thus the search term that helped me find all the other relevant sources, that is Stephanie Wohl's articles published in the Scotsman. Can we go to the next slide, please? So it seems that between 17 November 1875 and 27 September 1881, Wohl sent a series of 32 letters to the Scotsman, which were published anonymously. She reported on Hungarian life and manners and covered a range of topical events usually associated with special correspondents who fulfilled reporting duties at home, such as annual events, exhibitions, concerts, operas and theatre, royal pageantry, celebrity news, and domestic travel writing. According to the tradition of anonymity, these articles only carried the byline from a Hungarian correspondent, from an occasional correspondent, by an occasional correspondent, or from our own correspondent. Therefore, the succeeding question I needed to answer was, were these articles indeed written by Stephanie Wohl, and how can I document her authorship? Sources beyond the periodical text helped me identify Wohl undeniably as the article's author. For the National Library of Scotland holds the surviving business records of the Scotsman, among which the contributors' daybooks, several large handwritten volumes that comprise annual lists of contributors from 1872 to 1953. One of these volumes that enumerates contributors from 1872 to 1881 has made it possible to determine the identity of the anonymous Hungarian correspondent, that is Stephanie Wohl. Surprisingly, the contributors' daybooks provided further information regarding Stephanie Wohl's connections to the Scottish Daily. Can we go to the next slide, please? For the first 2 entries also mention the name of George Liechtenstein. I must confess that I had no idea who he was at the time. Therefore, my eureka moment concerning his identity, paraphrasing Patrick Leary, took place again in front of a computer screen. I started Googling the name and soon discovered that Liechtenstein, himself a native of Hungary, was a political émigré who had left his homeland as a consequence of his involvement in the Revolution and War of Independence of 1848-1849. After a short time in Berlin, he fled to London and eventually settled in Edinburgh in 1856, where he devoted himself to music and influenced the musical taste of the city. He was for many years director of the Edinburgh Philosophical Institution and one of the founders and presidents of the Edinburgh Society for Musicians. He was also director of the Charlotte Square Institution, the of young ladies, where he acted as head of the music department. He died a bachelor in 1893 and was buried in Morningside Cemetery, Edinburgh. So you can see on the slide a portrait that was published about George Lichtenstein in the musical Herald in 1891, and his gravestone in the Morningside Cemetery, Edinburgh. Despite being listed in the contributors' daybooks, it is not very likely that George Lichtenstein, who lived in Edinburgh at the time, commenced a series of articles published in the Scotsman. It is more likely that he acted as an intermediary between Stephanie Wohl and the journal. Wohl probably sent her first letters to Lichtenstein, who then passed them on to the newspaper. The person recording the names in the contributors' daybooks thus initially listed the name of the submitter instead of the author of the article. Nevertheless, in the second entry, the clerk may have been aware that submitter and author were not one and the same person. Therefore, Lichtenstein's name is changed to Wohl, and Stephanie is listed as author of the ensuing letters. In this way, the contribution between Wohl and the editors appears to have been simplified, as she would send the letters directly to the editors without the mediation of Lichtenstein. Lichtenstein seems to have had multiple connections with the Wohl family. Both Lichtenstein and the Wohls originated from the Jewish community of mid-century Pest. Moreover, like Lichtenstein, the Wohl sisters' father also participated as a physician in the Revolution and War of Independence of 1848-1849. In addition, Stephanie's sister, Janka, was initially trained as a pianist, and therefore she may have very well met Lichtenstein as a child during her musical studies. Finally, the sisters developed a wide network of acquaintances and friends due to their salon, and perhaps contacted Lichtenstein as a result of these relationships. Regrettably, there are no extant letters between Stephanie and Lichtenstein to support these assumptions. Stephanie, nonetheless, clearly revealed her acquaintance with Lichtenstein in her last letter sent to Edinburgh, since her article on the exhibition of the ladies' domestic industry mentions Lichtenstein's nieces among the exhibitors. I quote, "Of the modern needle and fancy work products, much could be said, but I shall close by a mention of the pretty paintings and drawings of the Mrs. Lichtenstein, the nieces of Mr. George Lichtenstein, which show talent and industry, and do credit to the artistic education these young ladies have received at Edinburgh." Conclusion. Sources beyond the periodical text and archival methods in the Anglo-American scholarship have been crucial in determining the identity of anonymous periodical contributors since the Wellesley and the Curran Index. A similar example for the identification of anonymous contributors with the help of archival sources on a large scale is the Athens Index of Reviews and Reviewers at the City University of London. Following the Wellesley, the Curran, and the Athens and other smaller projects, computer-based methods, and more recently genealogy databases have also been used for making periodical attributions. This case study about the Hungarian Stephanie Wohl's contribution to the Scotsman is just an addition at a smaller scale compared to the vast and still unexplored history of 19th century anonymous contributors to the Victorian periodical press. It again reminds us of Alexis Easley's, Andrew King's, and John Morton's warning in their introduction to researching the 19th century periodical press, that of the importance of combining computer-mediated searches with first-hand investigations of archival material, employing what George Tate calls in the same volume a mixed methodology. In Adrian Bingham's words, the convenience of digitization that indeed offers new opportunities for the study of national and transnational press histories should not make us lazy researchers who neglect the necessary archival fieldwork that remains still essential to scholarship. In Maria Di Cenzo's pertinent formulation, this is my favorite one, we should always remember that just because we have cars does not mean we give up walking. Moreover, the archival sources used to establish Stephanie Wohl's authorship open up new unexpected perspectives for the study of international communication networks, in this case of strategic collaboration between émigrés and their homeland contacts. These sources also give valuable insights into our understanding of the mediation of Anglo-Hungarian periodical relations and the role played by periodicals in shaping Britain's relationship with East Central Europe during the 19th century. Of course, there is still much to do, especially in the field of periodical research, where the comparative study of British and non-Anglophone periodicals is still relatively new. And we definitely need more sources beyond the periodical text to answer a series of questions that still remain open concerning my research as well. What was Stephanie Wohl and George Lichtenstein's relationship with the Scotsman's editor? How were the articles read by the Scottish readers? Who were these readers? Why were they interested in news about Hungary? What was the relationship between the creators of the newspaper and its readers? How was public opinion shaped by foreign correspondents about Hungary? And what do these articles say about the cultural ethos of the of the Victorian Scotland? At last, I would like to make a final confession. As throughout my research, I have worked with the digitized version of the Scotsman. I have never held the original printed version in my hands. I've never touched it, smelled it, experienced it as a physical object. Therefore, although this seminar is about sources beyond the periodical text, writing my paper made me think of the text of the periodical as well. Was it indeed the text of the Scotsman I was working with, or just its simulacrum? You ever have that feeling where you're not sure if you're awake or dreaming? Thank you so much.